Okay, so this is part 9. We kind of just had to stop because I ran out of time. Since I ran out of time, I didn't get to tell you guys. If you like these videos, like and subscribe. But let's move on to where we left off. We were talking about the crosshatch that we were trying to accomplish the other day. 5 seconds ago. Not the other day. 5 seconds ago is when we were trying to accomplish. But let's get back to it. So we were talking about this engine block that we have here and the crosshatch we were trying to accomplish on it. We talked about how I didn't move the drill up and down fast enough for this one, but the rest of the crosshatch looked okay. This group, they're going to have to do it anyway, so it really doesn't make much difference, but we noticed I wiped down the cylinder. That was the last thing that I actually did. One thing I want to mention, when you are done, let's say you have achieved that perfect crosshatch on this block. Not this very one, whatever one you have. Let's say you've accomplished that. The next thing you want to do is to take soapy water, so whether it's warm soapy water, whatever you got, and you actually want to clean out each cylinder. Whether it's with a towel or a sponge, whatever you want to do, you want to clean out these cylinders. You want to make sure you've removed all of the penetrating lubricant, as well as any of the foreign material that might be in there from when you were resurfacing and honing the cylinder. Now, immediately after you have done that, this is a very crucial part. Wipe all the soapy water off, and what you're going to do is you're going to take engine oil, and I wear gloves for this one, take engine oil and wipe it and lather it all over the cylinder walls. The reason why you want to do this is since you have just cut bare metal, and now you have washed it down with soapy water to clean it, it'll promote rust, and it will rust immediately. Within about a couple of minutes, you'll notice if you just leave the soapy water there and you come back, 10 minutes later, you'll notice, what the heck, this thing's rusting out. It promotes rust. So the one thing you want to do is as soon as you're done cleaning the block out with soapy water, you want to get engine oil, which I have on the bench, and take a good amount, not so much that you have a giant puddle of oil beneath the block, but lather up the cylinder walls. It should stay pretty much lubricated till the rest of assembly when you put the pistons and everything back in. But you want to do that. That'll prevent the rust, and it'll also make putting the pistons and the rings in a lot easier. So make sure you finish up by putting oil in each one of the cylinders and then taking a rag and placing it over it so nothing else gets contaminated or any dust or particles from anything else in the shop contaminate the oil that's sitting in there. Now, let's talk about maybe you're not at that step yet. Maybe somebody's using the flex hone. Maybe you've only done measurements on your crankshaft or your cylinder head or whatever else you have. Let's talk about the taper wear of a cylinder. So remember, some cylinders, they wear a taper like this. So they're not worn perfectly straight. They taper out depending on the wear. Some of the tools you might want to use is a T-gauge to measure the actual cylinder bore. So that's a transfer gauge. So you're going to use a T-gauge in the cylinder bore, and then use the micrometer to match up what the cylinder bore diameter is. I'd also recommend measuring in different spots. So split it up into fourths. So measure this way, so whether or not the cylinder has become out of round. You'll be able to see that with a T-gauge. Now, moving on to some of the specialized tools. Let's say if we're trying to find taper, we have this tool, which you need my permission to use and my okay to grab, because these tools are on the expensive side and we do not have too many. But this is to measure taper. So when you want a dial indicator like this, it'll look something along this lines. You actually dip it into the cylinder and you slowly watch what the dial indicator does. This will indicate whether or not you have taper or not. So whether or not you have taper, this has a small dial indicator. This one's in thousandths of an inch. So if you dip this into the cylinder wall, whatever cylinder it may be, so we're going to bottom this guy out. And all I'm doing is I'm slowly going down the cylinder wall and I'm watching. I'm seeing if that needle moves in or out. If it moves in or out, that means I do have a taper. And I'd measure it, once again, I'd measure it in fourths, so I'd split it up. But right now it looks like this cylinder's pretty good. I've only seen maybe a difference of maybe like a half of a thousandth. So that would be like 0.00005. Not a big deal that way. But if you do notice something, that's something you should mark on your worksheets and in your notes, because that's something worth paying attention to, because that might be an issue later down the road if that engine were to ever run again. Now, some of the other tools that I said I would show you guys, I would come around with. These tools are very expensive, but if I were a professional machine shop, I'd also have tools such as this. So let's say I'd be measuring for bore clearance or taper or things like that. I would use a tool such as this, very similar to the dial indicator I just used, but this would be measuring for bore depth, make sure I take the appropriate material off, as well as measuring if I have taper or not. So you'll see a lot of videos where guys like this, they'll be actually at the CNC machine or the honing machine where they actually have the whole block in a jig and they're actually honing, and they'll take this guy and they'll wiggle it back and forth. And what they're trying to see is, just like when we were doing brake measurements with the brake drum micrometer, what you're trying to do is you're trying to see where the needle stalls out at. So you'll see them using tools like this as well. I will come over to certain groups if you want to, just to see how this tool works, but it is very expensive. One of these would probably go for $300 to $500 easy, depending on what you got. This is a Summon, so this is one of the best ones you can get in the business. We do have it. It's just because I don't loan it out very often. And when I do, I am right there making sure the tool is not broken and it's put back in its place, just to be accountable. Those are a few things that you're supposed to do with the cylinder block. Yeah, cylinder block. That makes sense, Mr. H. Mondays, right? Okay, now moving on. Bed plate, everything else. The bed plate, you'll notice you have what we call anaerobic grease or sealant. It's that red jelly stuff that seems to get everywhere and you cannot really remove it. It is okay if you want to take that and either take a razor blade or a scraper or even take it to the parts washer to get that off. I understand that is very hard to remove. You can use the parts washer if you'd like to remove that grease. Now, if you're measuring oil clearances, here's something to remember. I might have people coming up with questions on how do I measure the oil clearance. Well, before you get to even this stage, when you have the bottom end, what I recommend is, once you get the bed plate off, do this first. Once you remove the crank and the pistons, put the bed plate right back on. Don't take the bearings out or anything. From there, you can use a T-gauge and measure what the clearance is through each bearing bore. Because you still have the bearings, it's just the crank's not there, so it's empty. Now you can measure that diameter. Next, now you have the crankshaft. Now measure the journal diameter. Same thing with the connecting rods. Whatever the difference is, that's going to be your oil clearance. That'll be your oil clearance for that spec, whatever it may be. So when we're talking about the tolerances between a bearing and a journal, that's what we're talking about. So the clearances, the oil clearances, that's the important one. That'll let me know, is this oil pressure going to suffice? Am I going to have enough room between the bearings? Is it going to add enough of a cushion or wedge of oil underneath? Or will it hinder? Will it wear out over time? Different things, different applications, such as that. So those are things I want to do right off the bat. If I am removing the crankshaft, the pistons, and all that, if you've already gone to that extent, that's okay. You can pretty much do it at any time as long as it's not fully back together. When you are putting everything back together, though, I do recommend to double check yourself with Plastigauge. So you're not able to do that on the camshaft bearings, as they said before, because, well, the camshaft bearings are only one piece. It's not like you can take caps off and squish them back together. Camshaft slides in and that's it. For the crankshaft bearings, we can use Plastigauge. So if you want to double check yourself, you are going to have to use Plastigauge either way, but that you would put on the main bearing surfaces, you'd squish it down, and you can double check yourself. How well did you actually measure it with a T-gauge and things like that? It should come up to about the same. Same thing with rod caps, piston rods, anything like that, you're going to use the same type of idea. Now, when it comes to the actual piston rings, most of your groups are going to reuse the rings because we do not have rings here at this time. There used to be many, but last year I had so many students break the rings because they were not actually cleaning in between the ring grooves, which you should have read on. If you do not clean between the ring grooves and you do have particles in between, once you go to put that piston in and you try to compress that ring, it will break right in half. It'll snap just like that. So make sure you clean out the ring grooves on the piston before you put the rings back on. You never know. When you're putting everything back together, what I recommend is using the proper tools. So you'll know that there is a box in there with ring expanders, ring compressors, so when you put the pistons back in their bores, it should go a lot smoother. Take care to not let the ring gap actually scratch up against the cylinder walls too. I've seen that happen before. That's one thing that I want to point out. When you are going to reassemble the bottom end of this engine, take your time. I know I've said this time and time again, but take your time because it could be the little things that actually end up being big issues later. So if you have a ring that didn't seat right, or if you're rushing to put a piston in and you got the ring to scratch the wall, that could easily throw off a leak down test once you're done and have the engine completely back together. And that's what you don't want. You want to make these engines better. So when you're working on the bottom end, definitely do that. Also, reassembling and disassembling the oil pump. That's a whole entire different subject on its own. So even if you are done with the cylinder block, just also remember the oil pump needs to be reconditioned as well. That'll probably be one of the next videos that'll be uploaded, whether it's today or tomorrow or whenever you watch this video. That should probably be part 10 because we had 8 and 8 got cut off. Now we're on 9, so that'd be part 10. Once again, if you do like these videos, make sure to smash the like button, make sure to subscribe. And since we did the big reveal, I will keep you guys updated on what's going on at Brahma 1 headquarters. For those of you who don't understand what Brahma 1 is, that's okay. I will explain that in more detail in one of the videos that are not class oriented. But I hope to see you guys soon. Have a great week. Have a great life.